Mindsetters, welcome to today's Grade 12 Life Sciences show, proudly brought to you by Macmillan. Today we have a special revision lesson on population ecology.
They say explain the graphs in terms of one. Now I've given you what happens just physically there. Now you need to explain. Explain means you need to give details why that is so. So let's look at graph type 1. I hope I know what I'm doing. Okay, there we go. Good. We're getting the hang of this. Sure. Right. The first one, there's a low infant mortality. Not many of the young are dying because the graph was going straight across. Go back. Why must I make you imagine when it's here? There you go. They're not dying there. They're surviving. Most of the offspring reach adulthood. Why? Because these are K strategy species. They have a high degree of parental care. High degree parental care means that they have few offspring, but the offspring that they have will survive to adulthood. Type 2, on the other hand, high infant mortality. High infant. Now remember we numbered it 3, but it's number 2 now according to our question, right? So this one will be 3. This one has a high infant mortality. Many of the young are dying. And many, all right, we said that already. They are R strategy species. R strategy species are those that have low degree of parental care. So therefore, they're not taking care of the offspring. They make many offspring, and many of those will die. But the fact that they make many is a survival strategy. So at least some will reach adulthood. And the last one, there's an equal chance of mortality survival throughout the lifespan. How do the, we're still busy with that. Population size is limited by, we said limiting factors are either density dependent or density independent. Density dependent, meaning it's dependent on density. It's a nice way to explain it. No, you're using the same words. It's dependent on the size of the population. If a factor is dependent on the size of the population, we say it's density dependent. If a factor is not dependent on the size of the population, then we say it's density independent. Let's look at some of them. Disease, competition, predators, parasites, food, crowding. In these cases, the greater the population, the greater the effect these factors have. It's obvious. Disease, if there's lots of organisms and they're living closer, the disease will spread fast. Competition, the more they are, the more competition. Predators, the more they are, the more they're going to be fed on. Parasites, same story. Food, the more they are, the less the food, and they're going to have competition because of that and crowding. Density independent factors, on the other hand, they're not dependent on the size. These factors, and you can see they all, we can call them natural disasters, volcanoes, temperature problems, storms, floods, chemical pesticides. What do? They're going to just disrupt the habitat one time. It doesn't matter whether there's 1 or 1 million. The effect will still be the same in a density independent factor. The carrying capacity of an environment is the maximum population size that a certain environment can support for an extended period of time for a population of a particular species. So the maximum number of individuals of a species that a particular habitat can support is known as its carrying capacity. Okay? So if you take a liter of Coke, a liter, all right, let's not talk of Coke, talk of a bottle, a liter bottle. Its carrying capacity is 1 liter. You can't put 1.5 liter in a 1 liter bottle. It can only take 1 liter. So the carrying capacity of that bottle is 1 liter. So the environment too can only support a particular number of a particular type of organism because of the space, because of the amount of food, gases, etc. in that environment and other resources. So we call that its carrying capacity. And to give you an analogy of a bucket filling up here, the carrying capacity is at this level here. That's the maximum this bucket can carry. Anything more than that has to spill over And if it's spilling over, it means the animals are competing and going to die. Or they have to move away from that area. This is what we are saying here. So when these things happen, then you're going to have population losses. Some of the population will be lost and they have to go away because you can't go more than that. Has to go in there. And some of the things that causes population losses, starvation because competition is taking place, accidents, pollution, old age, the animals just reach old age and die, disease, predation, other animals eat them, or whatever else that happens there. So that's what we're talking about in terms of carrying capacity. This then takes us to the next stage, and that is the population growth curves. The first type of growth, as we mentioned in our introduction, is exponential growth. Exponential means to double on double all the time, like compound interest. Right? And here's a graph that shows it. And now you'll see the J curve that we are talking about. So what happens here is a period of very slow growth, after which the population just rockets. So we have this period here which we call the lag phase. In this phase, population growth is slow because of one of two reasons. One is the organisms are still getting used to the environment. The big word that the textbook will use, they are getting acclimatized to the environment. So we're saying they're getting used to the environment. As soon as they get used to the environment, then the population starts shooting up. Or alternatively, the other reason for the slow growth could be that these individuals were sexually immature, so they could not reproduce. So those are the two reasons. The more plausible one is the fact that they're getting used to the environment. And that will fit into our evolution and the rest of it as well. So that's what's happening there. Very simple. There's two phases here, the lag phase and the exponential growth phase. You have to understand that in nature, this rarely occurs. Because we said something earlier, that carrying capacity will be reached. And then environmental resistance will come in. And when that environmental resistance comes in, this population will either go down or stabilize. The logistic growth form. Yeah, I put this in the form of a question because it's common sense. But we need to also listen to what the graph is telling us. So study the graph below and answer the questions that follow. There's the graph, time in hours. Look at the units next to the heading of the x-axis. And here it's number of yeast cells. So number is already a unit. You can't put units next to it. It's on the y-axis. So the number is dependent on time. Over time, the number changed. The number did not change the time. The time changed the number. So the number is dependent on the time. Dependent, independent. The independent factor comes on the x-axis in the graph. Look at the intervals. They are equidistant apart. And the same this way here, equidistant apart. And between 100 and 200, there's 100. Between 400 and 500, it's still 100, and so on, and so on, and so on. All right, let's look at this graph now. Oops. The answers have been exposed.
Oof, that's a bit of a
They
problem.
must have moved in the pasting here. All right, anyway. All right. We can fix that, Megan.
We'll just pretend to erase it.
There we go. They weren't so sharp to see it so quickly, right? Okay. So now they're not there anymore. Good. All right. Identify each of the phases labeled A to D in this graph. A, B, C, and this would be D here on top. This one here, D. Good. Let's see. A, and we can label it on here. A is the lag phase. Here. There. A is the lag phase. B, look at the growth. Exponential growth phase. C is this area here, not that. This is C. What's happening? The population is still growing, but it's not as steep as it was. So we say that this is the decelerating. This exponential can also be called the accelerating. Notice you can't say declining here, because the population is not declining. How can it be declining? Because it's still climbing up. but it's not climbing as steep as it was before, so it's decelerating. The foot is still on the pedal, but you're taking your foot slowly off, so it's not traveling so fast anymore. And last here, this one here, this area here, this is known as the stationary. What's the spelling? Oops. So what's the spelling, eh? What's the spelling? Stationary with an A, not with an E. Stationary with an E is the pens and pencils that you use. Stationary, or we can call it the equilibrium phase. Notice in nature, you're not going to get such a nice S. Your population cannot stay the way that it's showing here. So in this area here of stability or stationary or equilibrium, you may even have something that goes like that, goes up, like that, goes up, like that, goes there, and then goes that way as well. Same thing. The point is it's staying in more or less the same area. It's fluctuating around a small area and it's going through there. It's still the stationary phase. Okay, so there we have named them log. Another name also for the exponential is log, coming from logarithm. Okay, decelerating and stationary. Next question. Describe each of the named phases. You've named them, now we need to describe them. Describe means you must tell us what's happening there and why. So the first one is the lag phase. The population is initially slow. The population growth, is slow because same reason we gave earlier. It's still, and I've used the big word here, it's still acclimatizing or adapting to the new habit. I would rather use the word getting used to. Okay? Then we have the next phase, the log accelerating exponential phase. When conditions become suitable and the population is now used to the environment, it starts growing rapidly. You must say slowly first, rapidly here. You can't say growing. It was growing, even there it was growing, but it was growing slowly. There, look there, there's growth there, but it's slow. But here it's rapid. You see how specific you have to be in your answer. So the growth is rapid there. This is also due to limited environmental resistance. Because they're well below the carrying capacity, there's no resistance from the environment. So they're allowed to increase tremendously. And the natality rate is way greater than the mortality rate. Then we go to see the decelerating growth phase. As now environmental resistance starts increasing, slows the growth rate. So it's still increasing, but at a slower pace. So there's a slower increase. You must mention slower increase. You cannot say decrease. It's wrong. The last one there, equilibrium or stationary phase. Now there's more even environmental resistance. Why? Because the population is close to carrying capacity. They're reaching carrying capacity. The population has reached its carrying capacity, so the population stays more or less the same. And what is carrying capacity? Is the number of individuals that the area can sustain or keep alive. C, name a phase that may be present after the equilibrium phase. That means after this phase here, we can get another phase. You must name that. And the answer is the death phase. Some textbooks use the word extinction phase. I do not like that. Extinction means that all those animals become extinct completely. That's not the case. They die. They may move away to other areas as well. It doesn't mean that they're extinct. Okay? Extinction by definition means there must be not one more of that left on Earth. Okay? Describe this phase. What happens here? Many individuals may die or leave this environment due to dramatic change in or degradation of the environment. Something has happened to this environment, a fire, or there were too many, they were overpopulated and they ate all the food that was available. Now, if there was so much food available, now there's so little food available, so the carrying capacity has decreased. Okay? And other factors like food, shelter, etc. has brought this down, and that is what we have there. We then move on. Let's just go one step back to the graph again. I just want to use the graph itself to be explained. So now how is this asked? You can ask. How is this asked? You can ask. Either they give you a graph like this, and they ask you what I've just asked you here, or they give you a table, and they ask you to draw the graph, and when you draw that graph, then you will get the shape, and they can ask you questions based on that. So you need to know how to explain this. Also, you must be able to compare the two graphs, the logistic and the exponential growth forms. You see they both have a lag phase, they both have a log phase, but the logistic has stationary and or death phase. And sometimes they put in a line here, dotted line here, where the stationary is happening, and sometimes they show you arrows here. They ask you what's the dotted line, that's carrying capacity. And they can ask you in figures, just without even having that line there. They ask you what's the carrying capacity of this. You look for where it's stationary, go across close to 700.
Okay guys, I hope you are enjoying this revision session. If you are struggling and need help, remember to post on the Facebook page, facebook.com/learnextra. Now it's time for a break, so don't go away. We'll be right back. Welcome back from the break. Please let me know how your prelims are going. Guys, the end is in sight and your school careers are almost over. Don't give up now, push through, and remember that every little bit of extra effort will pay off. We believe in all of you, and that's why we're bringing you Spring School from the 23rd till the 27th of September, each day from 9 a.m. till 6 p.m. And don't worry if you miss anything, because we'll be repeating the day's programming from 8 p.m. each evening. Get all the details at learnextra.co.za/Spring School. But for now, let's get back to today's revision.
Question 3 asks simple definition type of a question. It says, explain what is meant by carrying capacity. And we've done that already. Carrying capacity of a habitat is the maximum. You must write this word maximum. In last year's exam, if you did not write the word maximum, they didn't give you the mark. Maximum number of individuals that the area can sustain or keep alive. Some reason our pen is giving us a problem today.
There we go.
Okay? So, again, coming back to the liter. If the liter bottle can only take 1 liter, 1 liter is its carrying capacity. Now, also, let's go back to something else. Let's go to your classroom. Your classroom has tables and chairs. There's probably 40 tables and chairs in some schools. In others, there may be only 20. In others, there may be 60. The number of tables and chairs determines the carrying capacity of your classroom. So if you have 40 pupils in your classroom, and there's 40 tables and chairs, that means you have reached the carrying capacity in that classroom. If one child even comes in now, there's a problem. Why? Because you've reached carrying capacity, there's no space for that one person. Somebody has to leave. Maybe it's you, or you, or you. So it's no good. However, if 2 or 3 leave, it's no big deal, because the class is still full. Remember our story about immigration and emigration and carrying capacity earlier? That's where I am. Now, if you had a class of 10, if you get another 10 children, no big deal, because your carrying capacity is 40 in my example of 40. So you've got plenty space. You can take more in that class. But if 5 decides to leave, 5 decide to leave, then you're in a problem, because you've got 5 left in your class. And now that may not be a viable number. They're going to have to take your class and combine it with another class to make it a viable unit. So this is what you must understand about carrying capacity. Again, key in this section, understand the concepts. Don't swap them. The next one was easy, population. A group of organisms of the same species in the same habitat. A group of organisms of the same species in the same habitat at the same time that have the ability to interbreed. Remember, if they gave 4 marks, your 4 marks would have been same species, same habitat, same time, and ability to interbreed. Generally, they would give 3 marks, you will get it for those 3. But please, do not leave this last part out. Although, I'm saying, if you say the same species, then obviously, from our definition of species, we have this ability to interbreed. In an investigation to find the number of African potato plants in a field area of 6,000 meters squared, 3 plots were selected, each with an area of 10 meters squared. Plot 1 contained 3. Here's your one figure. Here's the second figure. 3, and the other plots contain 7 and 2 African potato plants respectively. Now they want you to work it out. What indirect method is used here, firstly? Just the one we were talking about. Simple sampling or the quadrat method. Next question says, how should the plots be selected to obtain a reliable estimate? They must be randomly selected, so that we're not skewing our results. Estimate the total number of African potato plants in the field. Show all your working. Okay. So we start off with the formula. Where's the formula? There's the formula there. Sorry, there. There's the formula. We spoke about it just now. So now all we have to do after that for our 3 examples is to substitute. And as I told you earlier, these two numbers, 6,010 meters squared, 6,010 meters squared, 6,010 meters squared, will not change because that is the size of the sample. These numbers change. 3, 7, 2. You have your calculators, you can work it out, you can test me when I'm doing the right thing. 3 times 6 divided by 10 gives you 1,800, 7 times 6, 4,200, 2 times 6, 10, 1,200. You notice already, Luni, we got 3 different answers. We got 3 different answers because in the different plots, there are different number of plants. So what must we do then? We add these 3 numbers up, gives you 7,200, divided by 3 gives you 2,400. And that is what the estimate of this population is. Name one other indirect method that will be more appropriate to estimate the number of buck in a game reserve. Not plants like this, not slow-moving animals, but buck, which move quite fast. So what is that method? We discussed that earlier, and that would be mark and recapture method that we spoke about earlier. Good. Just to go back one step, before the break I said we're going to talk about this guy. Why do we take 3? And that's where we come back to reliability. If we take one estimate, you can see already the one estimate was 4,200. The other one was 1,800 and the other one was 1,200. They have a problem. And we're giving an estimate of somewhere in between. So in other words, we've got to take many estimates and then take the average of those estimates to have a reasonable idea of what the population is. This increases the reliability of your investigation. Taking more samples, or increasing the sample size, or repeating the investigation, as we've done here 3 times, will increase the reliability of it. So reliability speaks to whether we can trust these results or not. And the only way we can trust these results is over and over and over, they must yield more or less the same result. Okay? Validity, on the other hand, speaks to the correct method employed, and whether things that's supposed to be kept constant were kept constant. So when you're talking about validity, you've got to look at the method. Was the method credible? Was the method credible? Can we, accept this method as correct scientific method? Or did we make mistakes along the way where we use different things to do different things, and therefore our results have been skewed? The last question that we will have time for is this one here. The study the 8 gender pyramids below, representing a developing country and a developed. Now we have spent a lot of time discussing the 2 graphs. Let's just go straight into the questions. The first question says, which pyramid, 1 or 2, represents a developed country? What must we look for? We look at the bottom and we look at the shape. This one here, wide base. This one, a narrow base. So obviously the one with the wide base would be a developing country, and the one without the wide base would be a developed country, so pyramid 2. Tabulate 2 differences between pyramid 1 and 2. Pyramid 1, life expectancy is low, 2 high. Birth rate is high. Look what I was telling you earlier in terms of that. And the last question says, give one reason why it is important to know the age, gender, population. We have to plan, we have to budget. If we don't know what is our distribution, how many males, how many females, how many in this case, how do we plan for those different things? Now, this question I put in as an essay to do two things. One is to teach us, you and me, how to answer an essay question. At the same time, it's testing us on the section that we've just done. Now let's look at the essay and analyze it. The essay says, using examples, Using an example, is there any verb in that first part? No. No verbs. Using examples. Describe, or there is actually to use. To use something is the verb there, to do something, use. But what do they mean? The main verb here, describe. Now we're going to change color just for emphasis. Describe. What comes after the verb? Predation, competition, and symbiosis. Three things. What must you describe? You must describe predation, competition, and symbiosis. Three things that you have to describe. And how must you describe it? You must use examples while you're doing that. And what about it? What's the next verb? Explaining. Let's use our color there. Explaining. It's another verb. Explain what? Explain how each interaction influences the population size of the organisms involved. So your emphasis is to discuss, or rather not discuss, to describe these things with an explanation of how they impact on the size of the population. Can you see what we are saying? Now, what did I do? I have highlighted the keywords, I've isolated the verbs, and whatever comes after the verb is what I must do. Describe what came after the verb: predation, competition, symbiosis. Those are the three headings that we have already. How must we do that? Explain how each of these interactions, which ones, predation, competition, and symbiosis, influence the population size of the organisms involved. And do all of this using examples. So this is our structure of the essay. Now notice the essay is 20 marks, and generally in your paper it will say 17 for content and 3 for synthesis. That gives you your 20 marks. The synthesis is not a heading. It's not something that you have to write. The synthesis is put there for the markers. The markers will be given a guideline on how to assess your essay overall. It deals with the following. It deals with the correct terminology used. It deals with the amount or the depth of your answer. And it deals with the logical flow of your answer. Those are the three most important things that is going to be judged when you're marking an essay. But it's not your problem that as long as you follow that thing. Remember, 17 marks, a whopping 17 marks out of the 20 is given for what? Is given for the content that you're going to present. Enough said about that. Let's go into the answer and see how this answer was presented. All right, so normally I advise people to keep your answer in the sequence that was given in the question, because that's how the memo will be normally set. So it's easy for the marker, when he or she is marking your work, it's going to go through the same sequence. So if you keep it in that sequence, predation first, then competition, then symbiosis, within that you're going to give an example, you're going to describe it first, give an example, and you're going to then say how it affects population size. So there's three things to do. One is to describe the relationship. Two is to give an example. And three is to explain how it influences population size. So you start with predation, for example. You're heading predation. What are you going to do? Describe what it is. Predation is where a predator captures and kills other animals for its food. Then we give an example. Lions that capture and feed on antelopes, zebras, buck, etc. All of that. Now, what can we say about the population size? Prey population will decrease and the predator population will increase when this happens. This is very rudimentary, it's very simply put. it can go into more detail. We can talk about that there is an oscillating relationship between this, that each one checks the other one. When the prey population increases, the predator population increases. When the predator population increases, the prey population decreases. Competition, you'll notice it's not only dealing with what we said, but it goes beyond that. Competition, you talk about intra-specific competition or intra-specific. So you're going to explain that, you're going to give your example, and you're going to talk about what happens in the population size. We don't have to do all of that. Then you go to symbiosis. You first talk about the definition of symbiosis, and then you will say there are three types. Parasitism and explain, and we've done that already. Mutualism and explain, and commensalism and explain. I'm only going to look at the last part in these cases. Parasitism, the host organism population size will decrease because it's dying. It's being harmed. And the parasite population increase until obviously the host dies. When that host dies, then that parasite population will have to decrease or find another host. In mutualism, because they are benefiting each other, both the populations will increase in this relationship. And in commensalism, the population of the organism that benefits will increase in size. The other one will not increase, nor will it decrease. It's just like there's no harm and no benefit, it's not going to, because there's no harm or benefit, it's not going to affect its population size. So can you see how we've done that to get our 20 marks? The facts were given, they were given in a logical sequence, and we used correct biological terminology with examples. So can you see we did one? We gave the description, example, effect on that. We didn't talk of one, then the next, and then come back to the one, and the next, and the next. Do one, finish the idea, go to the next one, finish the idea, go to the last one, and finish the idea. And that is how you will benefit in that type of a story. We move on to succession. Succession simply means changes in a community over time. And all ecosystems undergo some form of succession. What type of successions do we have? We have primary succession and secondary succession. We're going to look at each of these two types of succession, how they occur, what happens, what are the stages that they follow, and how it enhances development within the ecosystem. Here's a question taken from Eastern Cape Paper 2, question 1.4. It says succession is a series of environmental changes that occur in all ecosystems. In the diagram below, an ecosystem has passed through 4 stages. Study the diagram and answer the questions that follow. So they're giving you pond A, pond B, pond C, pond D. The first question says, write down the letters of the ponds in order from the youngest pioneer community to the oldest. So obviously you're going to look for the one that has the least number of organisms, and that will be number 1 will be B. Coming from that, a little bit more will be C. That's number 2. And then A, and lastly D. I wrote D, there should be 3, and that's number 4. So your answer would be B, C, A, D. Some amphibians and crayfish can withstand periods of dryness by burying themselves in mud. In which ponds would they survive? Is there any mud here or soil? No, they can't survive there. So they can survive here, there's very little. So it's pond A and pond D. Pond A and D. Black bass and bluegill, these are fish, make their nests on sandy bottoms. In which would you find them? In sandy bottoms, you'll get A, you'll get C and D. All 3 there, A, C, and D. So in other words, you didn't need to know rocket science to answer this question. You need to look at the diagrams and answer it. Do the above diagrams illustrate primary or secondary succession? Let's go back. You can see initially there was nothing happening there. There was no soil, etc., etc. There's some rocks, and later they became soil. So this would be primary succession. These are the types of questions that you can be asked.
Now it's time for a break, so don't go away. We'll be right back. Welcome back, guys. I hope you are getting into the idea of revision. Please let us know how you are doing. I'd love to chat to you on Facebook and on Twitter. Enough of the chat. Let's get back to revision.
Let's look at another one. Study the diagram and answer the questions. Here's something that we saw earlier, something happening there. Describe and briefly explain the expected changes in the biodiversity as the stages of succession progresses across there. Very simply put, we start by saying why this is happening, explanation of why biodiversity increase. First of all, biodiversity increases. We must first say that. If you look at the diagram, there were less organisms here, and as we go further, there's more organisms, so biodiversity increases. Then we must explain why it increases, or why there's changes. And what are you doing? You are simply going through the stages from pioneer to climax as we're going across that way, going down further and so on, and as we're going through. We can't read all the answers there, but the idea is to describe what is happening as one moves through succession. If we look at our questions, the first question here adapted from Limpopo paper 2 2012 prep, question 2.3. An investigation was carried out to investigate the growth of an impala population in a park. An area of grass and shrubland was fenced off, and 50 impala buck, 25 male and 25 female, were introduced. The park contained no other buck or predators. The number of buck present in the park was counted every 2 years in July. The graph below shows the impala population each July over a 20-year period. First of all, you've got to ask yourself. Now remember, now you're not asking topics at a time. You're writing one big paper. So where does this fit in? This fits in environment. Which part of environment? Population studies. Okay? So there we have our story, and they give you a bar graph to give you this population. From 1960 story to 1978, time in years. Notice all the headings that are given to you there, x-axis, y-axis. Look at the intervals are equal all the time. Remember that this is more not a bar graph, but it would be a histogram because the bars are connected to each other. So it's a histogram that is presented here. All right? You're plotting there, you're not plotting, they plot there. They say give 2 reasons why the growth rate from 1960 to 1962 is slow. Why in this area here is it slow? What are we asking you to do here? We are asking you to analyze the information first of all. What's happening here? The growth is slow. At the same time, we need to interpret this information and explain why. Give 2 reasons why. Give 2 reasons why it is slow. So they're telling you it is slow, but you need to tell them why you think it is slow. First of all, and this is, again, now, what's the problem with this graph? Why will it give you a problem? Because you are usually used to, mind the pun because we're going to talk of that word used to just now again, you are used to seeing this graph as a line graph. And we'll explain that just now. So the first thing is that the population is adapting. I would take that word out anyway. It's there, but we try to take it out. We don't like that word too much. Adapting, we say acclimatizing or getting used to. Getting used to the environment. Okay? Firstly. So, in other words, new to this environment. You're not used to the surroundings. If I put you in a strange surrounding, you're not going to talk to everybody immediately. You're going to feel your way and you'll cling on to somebody that you think shares some things with you. Hi, how are you? Okay. And then you don't talk. And then, okay, where you from? And then you start talking. After a while, you're going to dance all over the show because you get used to the environment. The same way, the environment animals, they take time for the individuals to find mates and reproduce also. They're not just going to find mates and start reproducing immediately. This takes time. And they may be sexually immature as well. But environment studies generally tends to focus on the first reason given, that the organisms are not used to the environment and they're still getting used to the environment. Name 2 density-dependent factors. Density dependent. That means those factors that are dependent on the size of the population that may have contributed to the decrease in the population from 1968 to 1974. 1968 there, and all of a sudden it's coming down to 1974. There's something that has caused it. But they want density dependent ones, those that are dependent on the size of the population. And that would be, and I would add there, the lack of food, lack of space, disease will go on its own, and lack of shelter. There, and disease on its own. These are density dependent factors. Why? Because they would be more pronounced if the population is bigger and more close, and they would be less pronounced if the population is less or lower and spread out. Each one of them. Okay? How many impala were there in the park in 1970? Now, this is a straightforward question. You do not have to be a rocket scientist to work this out here. You go to 1970, you go across there, and you figure it out. It's about 1,000 there, more or less. You're going to use a ruler for that, obviously. And the answer is 1,000. Wow, I'm clever, ain't I? Abraham?
Very
I
clever.
had that answer without looking at me.
Smart.
Must be very smart. The light is here. The light is here. During which year were predators released into the park? Now, here, people, you're analyzing and your interpreting skills are important. The answers that we're giving are not the important and not the be-all here. Is how did we get to this answer, number one, and number two is what type of questions do they ask, and what is the theory behind what we are talking about. So they say, when was the predators released into the park? And if you look at this graph, you'll see from here what's happening. The population is increasing. Look at the shape of that line, by the way. Right? Okay. Look at the shape of that line, by the way. And can you see now what I was talking about earlier? Your line graph would have shown an S, and then a decline, and then a going up again. Can you see that already? But they want to know, when do you think the predators were introduced here? How would you know this? I mean, you can't look here. Can you see any predators there? Now, you can't turn the page and look the other side. I can't go behind the screen and check. I won't be able to see anything either. So you need to infer information, interpret information from here. And what is the best clue? The best clue is the population size. If we introduce predators into the park, then obviously they're going to eat these animals and the population will come down. So when did they start decreasing? They started decreasing 1968, 1970. So your answer should be somewhere around there. And 1968, 69. Okay? Remember, it started decreasing already. There, 1968, 69. So you've got your answer there. And give an explanation to your answer there. I've already given you that explanation. The impala would prey on, eat the impala. So not the impala, but what they asked you first, which were the predators? The predators would prey on or eat the impala, so the impala population would decrease. So you're explaining why you are saying that it happened then. Because this one here is when the population started decreasing, and this implies, or I infer from this, that the predators are the cause for bringing the impala. Remember, it's not the only one, but if this was the case, that's the time they would have been coming in. Next one says, a gardener wanted to know the number of weeds in his vegetable garden, which is 10 meter wide and 3 meter long. He took a number of quadrat samples which were 1 square meter, 1 meter square. The numbers in a quadrat represent the number of weeds occurring there. So there's one set like that. These are all 1 square meter. The whole thing is 10 meter wide, in this case, and 3 meter long. So were the samples taken at random? That's the first question. Yes or no? Yes, they were. We can see they can be taken from different spots. Give a reason for your answer in question A1. There is no fixed pattern. You can't see any fixed pattern the way they're going here. You can't see it happening that way. It was taken randomly. Random means no fixed way. There's no guarantee which one they're going to take, which plot. Okay, and if you know the simple sampling, then you know it. Calculate the average number of weeds in the samples. Now again, in the exams, they give you the formula. So don't stress about the formula. All we do is, but in this case, they only want to know the average. The average is, if we take all these guys and we add them, and how many samples? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and we divide by 7. 84 divided by 7 equals 12. And there's your answer there. The size of the weed population in the whole vegetable garden by using the formula. And there's the formula now. Average number in the sample is equal to habit size over sample size times number in the sample. And that would be, there's your story there, average per quadrat times habitat. They're using the average here, remember? They're using the average here. Well, they've put it on that side, so we take that out. And you have that 12 times 30 over 1 equals 360. 12 times 3, 36. There's a 0, 360 divided by 1. So therefore, you get an answer of 360. Write an essay on the interactions, keyword, between organisms of the same and different species. So, interactions between organisms of the same species and interaction between organisms of the different species. What interactions have you learned? In other words, this is lending itself to community structure, okay? And that's what we're going to be talking about here. And what do you need to do? First of all, you need to explain things like predation. You're going to give a nature of predation. What is predation? You'll give an example and you'll go further. You will go further. You will go further. Yes, you will go further. And I'm not going anywhere further at the moment, AB. All right, so predation. It's given the nature and the balance between predator and prey population. In other words, you're going to talk about the fluctuations between the predator and prey population, that oscillating relationship. When the prey population goes up, the predator goes because there's more food, and when the predator population goes up, it starts eating more, predation pressure increases, the prey population comes down. Now there's less food for the predator, so their population will come down, and when their population comes down, now there's less things eating the prey, and the prey population goes up. So you're going to explain all of that in this first point here. And the order doesn't matter because they didn't tell you in which order. You could have spoken about anything. Here it's talking about different species, right? Then you can also talk about competition. And in this competition, you could have stated here intra and inter. So you can talk about within the species and within two different species. You could have spoken about that, why, that is a density dependent factor, etc., etc. Then you could have gone further. You could have also spoken about parasitism, commensalism, and mutualism. All of that, inter and intraspecific stories that we are talking about there. So all of that would have been given. All of that you've spoken. You could have even gone further to talk about of human influence. How do we come in and, because we also a species, how are we interacting with these other organisms, and how do we influence it? For example, using biological control, using pesticides, etc. Or we could talk about a little more on competition in relation to natural selection, how this competition will lead to the best surviving, if it was us, but it's not asked in this one here. But more importantly, these two things, because they are asked in this section. The difference between competitive exclusion and resource partitioning. Competitive exclusion means, by the word competitive, there's competition. Exclusion, somebody is going to lose out. Somebody is going to be excluded. So if there's two species put together and they have the same needs, then if one outcompetes the other in such a way that that one population goes up and that other one becomes absent in that population, that means this one won and this one lost. So competitive exclusion. Resource partitioning, simple English, guys. Resource, you know what is the resource? The environment is the resource. Partitioning, to break the environment into little pieces. Not literally, obviously, but here in partitions, in compartments, where different animals have different requirements. Therefore, they can exist together without competing with each other. The famous one is where the zebra eating high up on the leaves, the wildebeest and the other bucks middle end, and the duikers and smaller animals and rabbits, etc., they eat on the floor. So they can coexist in that environment. Also, another example we spoke about last week, where on the seashore we have different organisms having different requirements, and therefore they can live that way as well. So those are some of the things that you needed to discuss there. Like I said, we're not giving the answer, but we're telling you how you should answer the essay. Remember, any essay is possible, and we are just exploring different ones here as we go along.
We've come to the end of today's show. Thanks to Macmillan for making the show possible, and thank you for joining us and for participating in this revision session. Remember to visit our website, learnextra.co.za/live to get the notes and to watch the videos. If you are stuck on any questions, make sure you post them on Helpdesk at learnextra.co.za/helpdesk. Don't forget to join us for Spring School starting on Monday the 23rd of September at 9 a.m. See you then.